Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to episode number 86 of International Relations This Week. From today, we shall be presenting IR This Week in a brand new format. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m., we shall go live to cover all the important geopolitical developments so that you can comprehensively prepare for international relations for both prelims and as well as for mains. So do support the initiative by liking the video, share your comments below after the live stream ends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's get started with this week's international relations. And let's take a look at the key topics that we have lined up for today's discussion. We will begin the discussion by talking about India-Bangladesh relations, following the landmark visit of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to India last week. We shall also talk about the Commonwealth Group, its history, its relevance, and India's equations with the Commonwealth Group. This topic has also been in news following the recent death of the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Then we shall talk about few new developments related to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and we shall evaluate the recent disaster in Pakistan, the devastating floods, and analyze whether this provides an opportunity for disaster diplomacy between India and Pakistan. And finally, we shall close the session by talking about the upcoming visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Central Asia. We shall talk about the strategic competition between India and China in the Central Asian region. So these are the important topics that were in news over the last 1 week. And over the next 1 hour, we are going to break down all these topics in complete detail, understand them in depth, so that you're fully prepared for both prelims and as well as for mains. So let's start with the first topic and talk about the latest developments in India-Bangladesh relations. You might have read in newspapers that just a few days back, Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina paid a historic visit to India. During this visit, several landmark developments were reported. For example, the two countries have signed 7 important agreements. So we need to take a look at these agreements and their relevance for India-Bangladesh relations. Amongst these agreements was a water sharing treaty, which happens to be the first major water sharing treaty between India-Bangladesh signed in the last 26 years. Because the last water sharing treaty was signed back in 1996, which was the Ganga water sharing treaty. So 26 years later, India-Bangladesh have signed an important agreement to resolve one of their water sharing disputes. And they've also launched negotiations for a free trade agreement. It's a proposed free trade agreement between the two countries. And a number of key projects, infrastructure and connectivity projects, have also been inaugurated. So to understand these topics in detail, first we need to know the basic background to India-Bangladesh relations. See, Bangladesh happens to be one of the key neighbors of India. Bangladesh is located over here. It opens towards the Bay of Bengal, and it is sandwiched between mainland India and northeast of India. So as a result, Bangladesh occupies a strategic location in the South Asia region. And India shares more than 50 rivers. There are around 54 transboundary rivers that are shared between the two countries. If you look at the land border between the two countries, it stretches to more than 4,095 kilometers, and it happens to be the longest land boundary for India. Amongst all the neighboring countries, India's land border with Bangladesh is the longest. So all these factors make Bangladesh very crucial for India, and Bangladesh has been critical to stabilize the northeast region and to counter insurgency in the northeast, because several insurgent groups had found a safe haven in Bangladesh. So due to all these factors, Bangladesh is a very, very important neighbor, and hence we have to understand the latest developments following the visit of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. During this visit, 7 important agreements have been signed, and the first one is a water sharing agreement to share the waters of the Kushiara River. In a few minutes, we are going to talk about this agreement in detail. It's a very, very important topic. Apart from this, 6 more agreements have been signed, which includes training and capacity building programs between the railways of India and Bangladesh, between the judicial institutions of the two countries. So these are some soft power initiatives that have been taken up, where India will share its expertise and help train Bangladeshi officials. And we are also sharing our IT expertise in the field of information technology to help better manage the railway networks of Bangladesh. So these are some minor agreements that have been signed. Then with regard to science and technology, India's CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and its Bangladeshi counterpart have signed an agreement to collaborate together in the field of research and development. India and Bangladesh have also signed a treaty to promote space cooperation between ISRO and the Space Agency of Bangladesh. Then finally, India's Prasar Bharati and the Broadcasting Network of Bangladesh have also signed a TV broadcasting agreement to promote technical cooperation in the field of TV broadcasting. But all these agreements happen to be relatively minor as compared to the first agreement, which is the Kushiara water sharing agreement. So we need to talk about this agreement in detail and understand the significance of this treaty. So let's begin by talking about the geography that we share with Bangladesh. As I mentioned earlier, we share around 54 transboundary rivers, and many of these rivers are disputed between the two countries. For example, we have the Ganga river system, the Brahmaputra, the Teesta. We also have the Barak that flows down from the northeast of India. We also have another river called the Feni that flows down from Tripura into Bangladesh. So all these are some major rivers between the two countries. Eventually, most of these river systems, they merge in Bangladesh and they form a mega river system called the Meghna, which drains into Bay of Bengal. So this is a shared resource between the two countries. And obviously, when you have so many transboundary rivers, water sharing is going to become a dispute. Because water management is of very serious concern to both the countries. It could result in floods. It could affect the flow of water in the downstream areas, especially in Bangladesh. Any irresponsible management of these rivers, especially by the upper riparian, which is India, could affect availability of water down the stream in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh has always been concerned with regard to sharing of these rivers because Bangladesh is at a disadvantage. It is a downstream country. It's a lower riparian state. So with regard to most of these rivers, we have standing disputes. Even with regard to sharing of the Ganga river, we had many major disputes which was partially resolved through the Ganga Water Sharing Treaty that was signed back in 1996. We still have the Teesta dispute, which remains unresolved till date. We'll talk about the Teesta dispute as well. The Brahmaputra and its management is also a source of concern. Then we have proposed a dam on the Barak River called the Tipai Mukh Dam, very close to the India-Bangla border, and Bangladesh has concerns about this dam project that India has proposed on the Barak. Even with regard to sharing of the waters of Feni that flows from Tripura into Bangladesh, there is a standing dispute. Amongst all these disputes, the Kushiara dispute was very crucial for Bangladesh. Bangladesh was pushing for a resolution from a number of years, and finally the two countries have worked out an important agreement. If you look at the geography of this region, the Barak River, which you see in the map, the Barak originates in the northeast of India, primarily in the state of Nagaland, and it picks up tributaries as it flows through Assam, Manipur, and Mizoram. So the Barak is a major river in the northeast of India. India has even built a national waterway on the Barak. National waterway number 16 has been built on Barak to promote inland navigation. So as the Barak crosses over the border and enters Bangladesh, it splits into two rivers. and gives rise to distributaries such as Kushiara and the Surma. Kushiara and Surma are the distributaries of the Barak River. Please make a note of this. It's a very important fact, especially for your prelims. There could be a map-based geography question on the flow of the Barak from India into Bangladesh. So Kushiara essentially is a distributary of the Barak, and it is vital for both the countries. The waters of Kushiara and the Barak is very important for Assam, especially the southern parts of Assam, and even Bangladesh depends heavily on these waters, because in this region called the Sylhet region, the farmers of Bangladesh, they cultivate a unique variety of rice called the Boro rice. It's a very popular variety of rice which is widely used in Bengali cuisine as well. So rice cultivation is water intensive, as you know. The flow of these rivers often leads to water shortage on the Bangladeshi side, especially during the dry season. During the dry season, there is a major water shortage reported in the Sylhet region of Bangladesh, whereas during monsoons, these rivers, they flood and they cause a lot of suffering to the people of Bangladesh. This is due to the geography, the terrain of the region, and also due to the nature in which the Barak flows into Bangladesh. Most of the water enters into Kushiara and it results in flooding during the monsoons. Whereas during the drier seasons like winter and later summer, there is a water shortage that is reported which affects the cultivation of the Boro rice. So this has a direct economic impact on Bangladesh. Hence, Bangladesh wanted a resolution for this, and it wanted India to work out an agreement so that a slightly higher share can be allocated to Bangladesh. So this long-standing demand of Bangladesh has been fulfilled through the Kushiara water sharing agreement, and it helps resolve one of the major river disputes between India and Bangladesh. It will benefit India as well. It will streamline water management in the region, help avoid floods. It will provide excess water supply to Bangladesh and thereby help agriculture in Bangladesh. So that is why the topic is very, very important for your prelims and also for your mains. Next, I was mentioning the Teesta dispute, which remains unresolved till date. So you should be familiar with the Teesta dispute and the reason why the dispute has not been resolved till date. See, the Teesta originates in Sikkim, in the Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve. There you have a glacier called the Zemu Glacier. That's where the Teesta takes birth, flows down into West Bengal, and then crosses over into Bangladesh. The Teesta is a lifeline for the people of India and as well as for the people of Bangladesh. Especially in West Bengal, there is a critical dependency on the waters of the Teesta. Even in Bangladesh, agriculture, industries, and even for drinking water, there is a major dependency on the Teesta. So sharing these waters has always been controversial between the two countries, and we had even worked out a temporary agreement back in 1983. It was an ad hoc arrangement that was created, which had allocated a higher share for India, whereas a lower share had been allocated to Bangladesh. So since then, Bangladesh has this demand that it wants to revisit the treaty, it wants to work out a permanent treaty so that Bangladesh gets a slightly higher share, as Bangladesh also depends heavily on the waters of the Teesta. Despite several rounds of talks and negotiations, this issue remains unresolved because the Teesta issue has been heavily politicized in both the countries. In West Bengal and as well as on the other side in Bangladesh, the Teesta issue is a very sensitive political issue because the subject of water sharing or water disputes, it's a very emotive subject. It's very easy to trigger people's passions, and political parties, they tend to politicize such issues for electoral gains. So due to excessive politicization of the sharing of Teesta, both in India and Bangladesh, it has become a very sensitive subject. In fact, back in 2011, under the Manmohan Singh government, India had actually come very close to resolving this issue by signing an agreement with Bangladesh. The treaty was also finalized, which would favor Bangladesh and also meet India's needs and requirements. But at the last minute, the signing of the treaty had to be cancelled due to tremendous political pressure from West Bengal. Almost every political party in West Bengal, they have politicized the issue, and as a result, India's diplomacy towards Bangladesh has been held hostage. This was a basic favor that was expected from India because just a few years before this, that is between 2009 and 2011, Bangladesh had done India a great favor by helping contain the threat of Northeast insurgency. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who belongs to the Awami League, happens to be a very close friend of India. Since the days of liberation of Bangladesh, India is very close to Awami League, Sheikh Hasina, her family as well. So as soon as she came to power in 2009, she immediately assisted India to crack down on the terror infrastructure in Bangladesh, which was hosting several Northeast insurgent groups. So this security threat was contained with the help of Bangladesh. So as a return favor, Bangladesh was expecting that India would resolve the Teesta issue and thereby help strengthen Sheikh Hasina's position, political position in Bangladesh. But unfortunately, due to domestic politics, coalition politics in India, we couldn't work out the treaty, and even today it remains unresolved. The reason is the issue has been politicized. No party wants to commit to the treaty because of the electoral implications. So this is a demand that comes up from Bangladesh even today. Even during the recent visit, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina brought up the issue, and Bangladesh has shown displeasure towards India's failure to achieve a resolution of this dispute. So that is why the topic is very, very important. Next, with regard to trade and commerce between India and Bangladesh, there were some important developments. See, Bangladesh happens to be our largest trading partner in South Asia. Amongst all our neighboring countries, the biggest trade relationship we have is with Bangladesh. According to data from 2018-19, India's exports to Bangladesh stood at around $9 billion. Over the last few years, it has almost doubled to around 16 billion. Even Bangladeshi exports to India has increased. But the problem is there is a huge trade deficit, as you can see. Bangladesh imports a lot more than India, and there is a huge trade deficit which creates an imbalance in the trade relationship. Even though Bangladesh enjoys duty-free access under the provisions of the SAFTA, which is a free trade agreement under the SAARC organization, even though these benefits have been given under SAFTA, still Bangladesh registers a very big trade deficit against India. So to address this trade deficit, Bangladesh has been requesting India to work out a free trade agreement, a bilateral free trade agreement, which will provide for the free movement of goods, services, and as well as investments between the two countries. It will also help boost the trade volume between the two countries. It will create tremendous economic opportunities on both the sides. So there are several key imports that we procure from Bangladesh, like jute, textiles, even pharmaceutical products, etc. India also exports a lot of key items, key goods and products and commodities into Bangladesh. So this is a very important trading relationship as far as South Asia is concerned, and hence the two countries have started negotiating a free trade agreement or a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, also called a CEPA. So this free trade agreement is expected to boost the trade relations, and both countries are trying to fast track the process, and they want to achieve this agreement by 2026. Because by 2026, Bangladesh will be officially designated as a developing country according to the standards of WTO. As of now, Bangladesh is classified as a LDC, as a least developed country. So when countries are classified as least developed countries, as per WTO, they enjoy a lot of benefits with regard to trade. They are given a lot of trade concessions with regard to duties and taxes, tariffs, etc. So Bangladesh will graduate from a least developed country to a developing nation, and hence it will lose some of the trade privileges under the WTO. So before this, India and Bangladesh are looking to work out this free trade agreement so that Bangladesh can continue to enjoy the benefit of duty-free access into the Indian market. It will boost the exports of both the countries and create numerous job opportunities on both the sides. So this is a very big development in the region because it would cement the relations between India and Bangladesh as close economic partners as well. Then finally, the two countries inaugurated several important connectivity projects and infrastructure projects. See, when it comes to Bangladesh, connectivity is a top priority. Because if you look at the map, you can see that Bangladesh is located right between mainland India and northeast of India. Right now, our access to northeast is limited via the Siliguri corridor, which is a strategic choke point because it's a very narrow land corridor, which is the only connection between mainland India and northeast of India. So for many years, we have been seeking transit access via Bangladesh so that we can have an alternate route to access the northeastern states, and we can even provide sea access to the landlocked northeast of India. Because Bangladesh has many important ports like the Chittagong port over here and the Mongla port over here. So India and Bangladesh are working on many connectivity projects to link their roads, their rail networks, and they're also looking to connect their inland navigation channels on the Ganga, the Brahmaputra and the Barak. We are also linking our ports, major ports of India and Bangladesh like Kolkata with Mongla and Chittagong, so that we will have alternate routes to access the northeast, and this could bring development opportunities to northeast of India. So that's why connectivity with Bangladesh is very crucial, right? So in this regard, a number of key infrastructure projects have been inaugurated and you should be familiar with them. The Maitri power plant, which is basically a thermal power plant, was inaugurated. It has been built with Indian assistance. India has funded the project with a loan of around $1.6 billion. Then three important connectivity projects have also been set up, which includes the Rupsha Bridge, the Kulna Darshna railway line, and the Parvatipur Konya railway line. These road rail projects will bring West Bengal closer to Bangladesh. It will promote the movement of people and goods, and it will boost economic relations and also cultural relations between the two countries. So that is why the recent visit of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is very, very important as far as our exams are concerned. These are landmark developments that took place, and it further brings India-Bangladesh closer. So you can expect a number of prelims and even mains questions on what we have discussed. So now let's move on to the second topic and talk about the Commonwealth group. The Commonwealth was in news because just a few days back, the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, passed away. So with this, few countries of the Commonwealth group, they have considered the idea of transforming themselves into republics, into republic states, by removing the British monarch as their head of state. So to understand the significance of this, first you should know that the Commonwealth group, it's a major grouping, it's an international grouping headed by Britain, headed by the British monarch, and it is a collective that brings together the former colonies of Britain. The former colonies of Britain located all across Asia, Africa, North America and South America, and even across the Pacific. Many of these countries have been brought together under the Commonwealth group, and some of these countries, around 14 of them, which are members of the Commonwealth, they have accepted the British monarch as their head of state. This has been done by several countries, including major countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, several countries in the Caribbean. Even though these are democratic countries, they are actually constitutional monarchies even today. For example, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they are all modern democracies, right? They are constitutional democracies, but they are not republic states because they are still headed by the British monarchy. The British monarch, the Queen, was serving as the head of state of these countries as per an arrangement created under the Commonwealth group. So now with the passing of the British monarch, some of these countries are considering the idea of ending the role of the British monarch as the head of their state, and they are planning to hold a referendum to ensure that they turn into a republic just like India. Is that clear? So that is why the topic was in news, and it's important in this context to learn the history of the group, the relevance of the organization today, and the equation that India has with Commonwealth. Just a brief understanding can be very, very important, especially for your mains. The Commonwealth of Nations, or the Commonwealth Group, consists of 56 member countries, which are basically former British colonies. Like I said, these former colonies are spread out across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Pacific. So in South Asia, we have former British colonies like Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. They are all members of the Commonwealth Group, right? There are even few European countries like Cyprus, Malta, and of course, the UK itself. But amongst these 56 members, 14 countries, such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, few Caribbean nations, these 14 countries, they had become part of the Commonwealth realm, which had accepted the monarch, the Queen, as their head of state. So in many ways, these democratic countries were still constitutional monarchies. So that is why they are considering the idea of moving away from the monarchy and to end the role of the Queen or the monarch as the head of state of their countries. So they're planning to hold a referendum to move out of this arrangement, and they're planning to transform themselves into democratic republics. Now, if you look at the Commonwealth, this group or this organization, it has always been a little controversial from India's point of view. I think it's pretty obvious why, because this group has always been a reflection of British imperialism and the colonial exploitation against the colonies. Obviously, as India had suffered immensely under colonial rule, there was a slight hesitation post-independence to join this organization. There were both pros and cons to join the Commonwealth, but eventually India decided to join the grouping as it saw a few benefits for Indian foreign policy. So it is that context that we need to understand. Why would India join the Commonwealth despite having reservations against being part of a former group that represents British imperialism and colonialism? So the Commonwealth traces back its history to the 19th century. By 19th century, in various British colonies, the independence movements were gaining ground. Nationalist movements had gained ground in several colonies, including in countries like Canada. So there was a demand, especially in Canada by 1867, where Canada was seeking self-rule, complete autonomy from British imperialism. In this context, the British monarch, the Queen, desired to maintain the colonial control over the colonies and proposed an idea to bring these colonies together under the Commonwealth grouping so that the monarch could still exercise leverage against the colonies while granting them limited autonomy, while allowing them limited self-rule. So Canada was the first country to be given the dominion status, whereas the Queen, the British monarch, would continue to be the head of state of the country. Self-rule was given, but the monarch could veto the decisions of the Canadian government. So that was the kind of arrangement that existed back then. Similar dominion status was extended to Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa as well. So all these countries were being brought together under the overall rule of the British monarch. The idea was just to enhance the control of the British monarch indirectly. While giving limited self-rule, the British monarch would still retain discretionary powers over the colonies and their policies. Is that clear? So this, of course, wouldn't satisfy the nationalists who started gaining more prominence, especially during the First World War. During the First World War, there was a greater awakening of nationalism, and many colonies started witnessing rising nationalist sentiments. But also you should observe here something that's very important. The self-rule which was given in the 19th and early 20th century, it was limited to white colonies. Colonies that were dominated by the white people, such as Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, etc. Similar self-rule was denied to other colonies in Asia and Africa. So clearly, there was a racial bias as well here. This was a clear reflection of British exploitative imperialist policies. But many of the colonies, they were not happy with the dominion status and the limited self-rule, so they started raising their demands for complete independence, to completely break from the British monarchy. So then came the Balfour Declaration of 1926. Through the Balfour Declaration, the British monarch further established control over some of the dominions, and some of these white colonies, they were given equal status with Britain. They were given equal status, they were given greater powers with regard to self-rule and autonomy, but however, the British monarch would remain the head of state of these colonies, like Australia, South Africa, and the others. So this structure, which was taking shape, was formalized in 1931 through the Statute of Westminster. This agreement would lay the foundation of the British Commonwealth. This was the first time that the British Commonwealth was formally created, formally established. Until then, it was an informal arrangement, a loosely based arrangement. Then during the Second World War, nationalist movements gained more momentum, especially across Asia and Africa, and following the end of the Second World War, as Britain weakened due to the impact of the war, decolonization became an eventuality. Finally, Britain started granting independence, which included India, Pakistan as well. And as decolonization was gaining pace around the world, this group, which until then consisted only of Britain and few white colonies, was established as the modern Commonwealth group through the London Declaration of 1949. By now, many of the colonies were being granted independence. So now the British monarchy proposed that all the former colonies can be bound together. They can work together through a platform such as the Commonwealth, so that they can not only share their culture and heritage, but they could also promote their ties, their economic relations and diplomatic engagement. So India was initially hesitant to be a part of the Commonwealth, and this was pretty obvious why. There was an argument that India should stay away from such a grouping, considering that Commonwealth represented British imperialism. But there was a counter argument that India would actually stand to gain, because it would serve India's national interests, as India could connect closely with other colonies, former colonies, and step up its diplomatic and economic relations with various countries. It would give India a platform, an opportunity to work closely with like-minded countries across Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world. So based on these considerations, India decided to join the group despite the colonial background and the imperialist concerns that were there. So eventually, India did join the grouping, and it happened to be one of India's biggest foreign policy decisions in that period, during that context. So after India joined the grouping, India did engage closely, because India had certain very important pragmatic interest, foreign policy interest to fulfill. India realized that Commonwealth could be a great platform for us to connect with other like-minded countries which had recently become independent. It would give us a platform for promoting economic and political relations with close countries in Africa and Asia. And also, we were dependent on the support of Britain to integrate our princely states completely into the Indian Union. Because post-independence, a few princely states were still hesitant to join the Indian Union. So, British influence and British pressure would work in favor of India, and hence India felt it would be in line with our interest to join the Commonwealth so that we can leverage British influence on the princely states. During this period, the Kashmir dispute also had broken out by 1947-48. And Pakistan had already made it clear that Pakistan would be joining the Commonwealth group. So to counter Pakistani presence and its influence, it became a necessity for India to join the group so that it could ensure that Britain wouldn't act unfairly against India. So all these practical considerations pushed India to join the group eventually. But over the years, India's involvement with Commonwealth has been fluctuating. For several years, we have worked closely with the group. We have used it as a platform to promote South-South cooperation. That is to promote relations between developing and underdeveloped countries. India has emerged as a leader in the Commonwealth because it's the largest member. It happens to be the largest member of the Commonwealth group. And we have been sharing our expertise. We have provided funds to help out other smaller countries, especially island countries, underdeveloped and least developed countries. We have shared our knowledge, our experience. We have helped them in training programs. We have provided a lot of funds to Commonwealth and its initiatives. The idea was to position India as a leader of the developing nations so that we could promote South-South cooperation between developing and underdeveloped nations. So in that regard, Commonwealth has been a good platform, a great platform for India. But every now and then, our equations with Commonwealth has fluctuated mainly due to the divide between Britain and India, especially during the Cold War period. During the Cold War, Britain was obviously aligned with the Western Bloc led by US. India initially remained non-aligned and later was forced to align with the Soviet Union during 1971 war. So due to all these circumstances, India's involvement with Commonwealth has fluctuated. There have been years where we have worked very closely. We have been one of the largest donors to the group. We have provided funds to help other countries. We have carried out training programs, shared our expertise in various sectors, mainly to promote trade and to promote development assistance to small countries and underdeveloped countries. We've also used the platform to strengthen democracy within the Commonwealth. Within the Commonwealth, there is a top priority given for democratic rights, fundamental rights, and human rights. If any member is seen to be violating these rights, then Commonwealth often takes action against them by suspending that country from the group. It has happened with quite a few Commonwealth members, including Pakistan, Fiji, Zimbabwe, etc. When there was a military coup in Pakistan, right, when the army threw out the civilian government and captured power, Pakistan was suspended for a brief period from the Commonwealth. When there was a constitutional crisis in Fiji, which led to violation of democratic rights, we saw that Fiji was also thrown out of the group, right? When authoritative governments took over in Zimbabwe, the country was punished by suspending the country from the Commonwealth group. So in this regard, India has been an active participant because India has remained committed to its democratic credentials. So it's only in this context that Commonwealth is of some relevance to India, but post 1991, that is after the Cold War ended, after the global geopolitics saw a major change, a major transition, India has been sidelining the group, and especially in the last 15-20 years, India has been giving relatively less importance to the Commonwealth. If you observe the trend over the last 15 years, you'll see that Indian Prime Ministers, including Manmohan Singh and Prime Minister Modi, they have chosen not to attend the Commonwealth meeting, which is held periodically. That is a clear sign of the lower importance that India attaches with Commonwealth today. Our objectives have differed. We see that Commonwealth is a part of the colonial heritage, the colonial hangover. So India has moved away from the Commonwealth largely. Our involvement also has gone down over the last 15 to 20 years. So this is a basic analysis that you should be familiar with, because you can expect a mains question here asking about the history and the relevance of the Commonwealth for India. So with this, we'll move on to the third topic, that is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This topic was in news because last week, a ministerial meeting took place in the United States involving the commerce and industry ministers of IPEF, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. India also took part in the event. India's Minister for Commerce and Industry, Piyush Goyal, participated in the event, and India has accepted 3 out of the 4 pillars of Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. It is a recently launched economic initiative led by the US that is focused on the Indo-Pacific region. So India is also a part of it. India has joined this initiative. This initiative is based on 4 pillars, 4 modules, which we are going to discuss. And India has accepted 3 out of these 4 modules. So in this context, it's important to understand what is Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. What are these 4 pillars of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? So this analysis shall be very important for both prelims and mains. See, in today's geopolitics, the Indo-Pacific region has emerged as the hub of the global economy. All major economic and even geopolitical developments, they are centered around the Indo-Pacific. It's primarily because of the rise of the Asian powers, led by countries like China, India, Japan, the Southeast Asian countries, etc. Parallelly, we have seen a decline of the Western powers, the Atlantic powers, especially European economies. So today, Indo-Pacific is the focus of global geopolitics, and we are witnessing intense competition and rivalry between US and China. China is challenging the superpower status of the US, and it leads to a intense geopolitical and economic rivalry in the region. So in the Indo-Pacific, China has already established its predominant position. Most of the countries here, they are heavily dependent on Chinese imports. China controls most of the supply chains. So many countries in the Indo-Pacific have a critical dependency on China. And along with that, China also leads economic initiatives like RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which happens to be the world's largest free trade agreement that was recently established in 2020. Initially, India was also part of the RCEP negotiations. But due to differences between India and the RCEP countries, India chose to quit RCEP. In 2019, India pulled out of RCEP negotiations. Parallelly, the US has seen a retreat in the Indo-Pacific, especially with regard to its economic influence. During the period 2016 to 2020, under President Donald Trump, the US withdrew from key economic initiatives such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was seen as a rival to the China-led RCEP. So if China was leading RCEP as the world's largest free trade bloc, US was looking to put in place a similar arrangement called Trans-Pacific Partnership centered around the Pacific region. But Donald Trump pulled out US from this initiative, thereby marking the retreat of US and the declining influence of the US in the Indo-Pacific. So after the new elections, the recent elections, President Biden, who took over, was looking to bring the US back into the Indo-Pacific and re-establish American economic dominance in the region, mainly to counter Chinese economic dominance. So it was in this context that President Biden proposed the idea of an Indo-Pacific economic framework last year during the East Asia Summit. Based on this idea, the Indo-Pacific economic framework was launched earlier this year in the run-up to the Quad Summit that involves India, Japan, Australia, and the US. Before the Quad Summit, the US announced the launch of this economic framework to bring together many countries of the Indo-Pacific to promote economic ties and economic collaboration. Immediately, as soon as US launched the initiative, 13 countries joined this grouping. See, this framework is not a traditional free trade agreement. It's not like RCEP. It's not like other free trade agreements that you would have heard about. It is just an economic framework which brings together these like-minded countries, and they are looking to collaborate in 4 specific domains. So they have identified 4 pillars or 4 modules of cooperation, and the intention is to promote economic ties and collaboration between these countries. So it's quite different from a traditional FTA, because generally free trade agreements, they look to reduce the barriers to trade. Barriers to trade such as tariff-based barriers, non-tariff barriers. Reducing these barriers is the focus of any FTA. So usually taxes are brought down, import duties are brought down, duty-free access is given, so that it promotes the free movement of goods, services and investments. So that is a traditional FTA for you. But Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not a regular FTA. It's just an economic framework, a platform through which like-minded countries are coming together to collaborate in 4 specific areas of economic cooperation. So which are the countries that are part of it? It includes India, Australia, Japan, Thailand, Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, New Zealand, the US of course, South Korea, Brunei, and even Fiji has joined this grouping. So today, 14 countries are part of it. Initially 13 countries were part of it, but later Fiji also joined the group, and now 14 countries are part of this initiative. It is based on the vision of the US to interconnect these like-minded economies and to ensure the stability and the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific. The idea is to counter China's economic dominance by integrating their economies and their policies. See, these countries that we are talking about, which are part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, many of them happen to be major economies of the world. Many of them are trillion-dollar economies by themselves, like India, South Korea, US, right, even Japan. So they do have the strength, they do have the potential to take on China's dominance and counter China's economic influence in the region. But the challenge for all these countries is that currently they have a critical dependency, import dependency on China. Most of these countries depend on Chinese imports in several key sectors. The supply chains in this region, they are largely dominated by China. So this becomes a weakness for countries of the Indo-Pacific which have issues and disputes with China, like India, US, Japan, Southeast Asian countries. They all have disputes and conflicts going on with China, because China dominates the economic sphere in the Indo-Pacific and often uses this as a geopolitical weapon to put pressure and target other countries. So this is where US believes that it has to diversify the supply chains and make them resilient to any supply shocks, so that the region need not depend heavily on China. The region need not depend heavily on Chinese imports and reduce its dependency on China-dominated supply chains. So that is the core vision of US, to move the region away from their dependency on China, to diversify the supply chains, to strengthen their economic ties. So for this reason, they have identified 4 key pillars of cooperation, which includes fair and resilient trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure and decarbonization, tax and anti-corruption. Within these domains, there are specific areas of cooperation that are being discussed. For example, under fair and resilient trade, the countries are discussing how they can integrate their environmental laws, their labor standards, how they can promote digital economies and share expertise with each other. So all such issues which will promote trade are being discussed under the fair and resilient trade module. Supply chain resilience is to strengthen the supply chains and make them independent of China and reduce China's dominance. There is focus on connectivity and infrastructure and also on promoting a clean economy, to decarbonize the economy, to reduce emissions, mainly to tackle the threat of climate change. They're also discussing collaboration to harmonize their policies so they can address the tax-related issues, reduce corruption, and thereby provide for better governance, better administration. So these are the pillars of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And during the latest ministerial meeting, India has agreed or it has accepted 3 out of the 4 pillars. Pillar number 2, 3 and 4, they have been accepted by India. India feels that it is going to benefit by accepting cooperation in these domains. That is supply chain resilience, infrastructure and decarbonization, and tax and anti-corruption. But however, India has decided for the time being to not agree to the first pillar, which is fair and resilient trade. Because with regard to the first pillar, India still has a lot of concerns on issues like synchronizing environmental laws, labor standards, on policies related to digital economy, data protection. On these subjects, India still has a few concerns and we are still not sure whether it will benefit India, whether it is in India's interests. Because generally on these issues, there is a divide between developed countries and developing countries like India. Developed countries have a very different viewpoint with regard to environmental protection, labor code, data protection, etc. This doesn't suit the interests of developing nations like India. They expect very high standards with regard to environment protection. They expect relaxed labor codes. They expect a free market, a complete free market for the digital economy. So for a developing nation like India, which still deals with poverty and welfare challenges, it may not be possible to match these high standards expected by developed nations like US, Japan, and the others. So on this issue, India has held back for the time being, and it is considering the pros and cons of collaborating in the first domain. India's primary concern is about data protection. This is a key area where an issue has been raised by India. Because see, India is pushing for data localization through its data protection law. We had introduced a bill in the parliament for data protection, but due to a controversy, the bill has been withdrawn. Right now, the government is coming out with a new bill. It's drafting a new bill. And even the new bill will focus on something called as data localization. This will push all the tech companies that collect or store or use Indian data to set up local servers or local data centers in India so that these servers and Indian data fall under Indian jurisdiction, Indian legal jurisdiction. This will give Indian authorities, Indian judiciary greater control and access to Indian data. But Western companies, the tech companies, are against data localization because it will increase their cost of operations. They'll be forced to set up local data centers in India. They're also concerned about data privacy and data security of their users. They feel that excessive government control could lead to surveillance against citizens. So on these grounds, the Western companies and their governments are opposing data localization, whereas India wants data localization to be made mandatory on security grounds, so that the government has control and access to Indian data. So such issues have emerged during negotiations, and that is why India has held back for the time being, right? But we have agreed to be a part of the other 3 modules, and that is the advantage of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. You can collaborate with these countries even in few select modules. Even if you don't agree to collaborate in a couple of modules, you can still collaborate in the other domains. That is the key difference between a regular FTA, a free trade agreement, and this economic framework which has been proposed by the US. Because in a regular FTA, you may have to accept all the commitments in all the sectors. So here the flexibility exists, and that is one reason why India has agreed to be a part of this initiative. Now moving on, we have two small topics. One is the latest disaster in Pakistan, the massive floods which have devastated the country. The Indus River basin has flooded and it has caused massive destruction across Pakistan. More than 1,000 people have been killed, millions have been uprooted, lot of infrastructure property has been damaged, even agriculture has been destroyed. So this potentially creates an opportunity for disaster diplomacy between India and Pakistan. Because following the disaster, Prime Minister Modi expressed India's empathy with the people of Pakistan. The government has expressed its condolences, and this is a very significant step because India-Pakistan relations have been completely derailed since 2016. Especially since 2019, India-Pakistan relations have come to a halt. This is because of repeated terror attacks from Pakistan. We had the Uri attacks in 2016, following which India retaliated by carrying out surgical strikes. Then we had the Pulwama attacks, following which India retaliated by carrying out the airstrikes, the Balkot airstrikes. So India has taken a stand that terrorism and talks cannot go hand in hand. So we scaled down our economic relations with Pakistan. We even revoked the MFN status, the most favored nation status, which we had given to Pakistan. And along with that, we scaled down the entire relationship. The ties were severely affected as a result of this. Then, in August 2019, India introduced key changes with regard to the political constitutional status of Jammu and Kashmir. The special status of J&K under Article 370 was revoked. Later, India reorganized the state into 2 union territories. Pakistan was very critical of these moves by India. It opposed these constitutional changes and it also downgraded ties with India. In fact, after this, Pakistan suspended trade with India entirely and the relations have never improved since 2016. So these disasters might provide an opportunity. It might provide an opening through which India-Pakistan can collaborate to slightly work on their relationship and to improve the ties. Because we have seen many such incidents in the past as well, and it is this past that you should be aware of. There have been incidents where India-Pakistan have engaged in disaster diplomacy. Essentially, they have provided assistance and relief to each other. They have extended aid material to each other when the respective countries have been hit by major disasters. For example, when India was hit by the Bhuj earthquake in Gujarat in 2001, then President Pervez Musharraf reached out to Prime Minister Vajpayee and had extended relief material to India. This was a big breakthrough because just a few months before the Bhuj earthquake, India-Pakistan relations had been badly affected due to the Kargil war, due to the testing of nuclear weapons. So this was a great opportunity for the two leaders to connect, and it played a role in furthering India's ties with Pakistan. In 2005, both the countries were hit by a devastating earthquake in the Kashmir region. Jammu and Kashmir and even Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, both were badly affected. So during this disaster, India provided relief material, financial assistance through the United Nations. Then in 2010, there was again a massive flood in Pakistan and India had again offered financial support. But this time Pakistan didn't accept it. Pakistan rejected the financial support from India, mainly because of the tensions after the Mumbai attacks, the 26/11 attacks. But still, it was an opportunity to assist each other during disasters, to show or extend a hand of friendship during their times of crisis. And such opportunities give a chance for diplomacy to work and improve relations between the two sides. Because see, India has always established itself as a net security provider in the region. Irrespective of our ties with a particular country, We have always responded during disasters, and we have emerged as the first responder all across South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. You take any country, for example, be it Sri Lanka, be it Maldives, be it Bangladesh, Mozambique, right? When any country in the Indian Ocean or in the South Asia region, when they are hit by disasters, India responds immediately. This has become a top priority in Indian diplomacy because we extend HADR support or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and it projects India's soft power and as well as hard power. It cements India's relations with all these countries and also establishes India as the dominant regional power. So India has a tradition of establishing itself as the first responder, and this is also ground for India to help Pakistan during the recent floods. There is also hope for revival of trade relations because Pakistan's finance minister recently said that Pakistan might consider reviving trade relations with India, mainly to import essential items like vegetables, fruits, as there is a huge food shortage in Pakistan following the floods. You might even be aware that Pakistan is going through a major economic crisis. So it is indeed dependent on outside support, and it might give India an opportunity to work with Pakistan and maybe repair the relationship, and that would become an example of disaster diplomacy. So that is why the topic is very, very important. Coming to the last topic, we need to understand the significance of the upcoming visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Central Asia. Starting tomorrow, the SCO summit, the summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is going to begin at Samarkand, which is in Uzbekistan. And the Chinese president is traveling to Uzbekistan, and it happens to be a very, very significant visit, a very important visit. Because this is the first time that the Chinese president is traveling outside of China since the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that itself gives significance to this visit of Xi Jinping. Plus, he would be expected to meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. And this comes at a time when Russia is being targeted by Western countries with sanctions for its invasion of Ukraine. So it would be very interesting to watch how China-Russia relations will develop, what would be China's position, and how would China interact with Russia. And most countries would be closely watching the China-Russia interaction at the upcoming SCO summit. The SCO is a very, very important regional grouping that is mainly centered around Central Asia. 8 countries are full-time members of this group. It includes Russia, China. There are 4 Central Asian countries as well, except for Turkmenistan. All the other Central Asian republics like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, all these 4 countries are part of this grouping. India, Pakistan have also been admitted as full-time members of SCO, and recently Iran also has been admitted, and very soon Iran will formally join the group as well. The SCO plays a very important role with regard to economic relations, counter-terrorism in the Central Asia region. So that is why India would also be watching these developments, because India would also be taking part in the SCO summit. Prime Minister Modi would also be traveling to attend the SCO summit. So it's in this context that the visit of President Xi Jinping becomes important, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about China's influence in Central Asia and the competition that we face with China as far as Indian interests are concerned in Central Asia. See, when you think of Central Asia, the first point you need to remember is that all these Central Asian republics that you see in the map, the 5 Central Asian countries, that is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, all these were part of the former Soviet Union. As the Cold War ended and Soviet Union disintegrated, these republics, they broke apart and they became independent nations. This region is blessed with resources. It has tremendous resources, natural resources. It is blessed with hydrocarbon reserves, uranium. Countries like Kazakhstan has uranium reserves. It also has oil and gas, which falls under the hydrocarbon category. It also has rare earth elements, rare earth metals, even hydropower. So essentially, Central Asian countries are blessed with all these resources. So as a result, Central Asia is a major focus for all the big powers of the world. There is a competition that goes on in Central Asia where countries are fighting for Central Asian resources. All the major powers like Russia, China, US, even India, Iran, Turkey, European Union, the European countries, they all are trying to tap into Central Asian resources, and it's a very big challenge because Central Asia is a landlocked region. As you can see, it's surrounded by land. Caspian Sea, the water body you see here, it's not technically a sea, it's a lake. So Caspian Sea is also landlocked. So Central Asia does not have direct access to the open sea. So connectivity is a big challenge in Central Asia to tap these resources. Plus the region is also hit by instability. The region has become very volatile due to rising radicalism, fundamentalism and terrorism. Terrorism from Afghanistan-Pakistan region spills over into Central Asia as well. So that is why the region is a top focus region for India and also for China. China has two major interests here. One, it wants to capitalize on the resources of Central Asia. And two, it wants to tackle the security threats in the Xinjiang province, which is the westernmost province of China. The Xinjiang province, located over here, borders Central Asia, and the natives of Xinjiang, the Uyghur Muslims, they have been oppressed and targeted by China for several decades. It is alleged that China has committed very serious human rights violations in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs. Some of the Uyghurs who are connected with radical fundamentalist groups, they have gotten themselves radicalized and they have even taken up terrorism against China. They have set up a terror group called ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which is seeking to establish Xinjiang as an independent nation called East Turkestan by breaking the region away from China. So China has major security interests as well because ETIM has links with other radical outfits and terror groups of Central Asia and Afghanistan and Pakistan. So China is deeply invested in Central Asia because of all these reasons, and it has brought on board all the countries, all the Central Asian countries under its Belt and Road Initiative. China has already invested billions of dollars. It has built roadways, oil pipelines, railway networks, and thus China is already in a dominant position. But some of the countries have a concern with regard to Chinese investments because there is a fear of falling under China's debt trap, especially Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. They are not strong economies like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan have relatively lesser resources compared to the other Central Asian countries. So the heavy loans they have borrowed for Chinese projects under Belt and Road Initiative is turning into a burden on these countries. They are not able to repay. Eventually, as per the agreements, China would take over these projects and these countries would become victims of the infamous debt trap diplomacy of China. So this is an opportunity for India to further step up its ties because India always offers mutually beneficial partnership to its close friends and allies. India shares historical ties, cultural ties with Central Asia, going back to the ancient medieval times. Right? The Silk Route, the Grand Trunk Road, they've always been a connection between the Indian civilization and Central Asian empires. There's a strong influence, cultural influence we share, connected with Islam, Buddhism, etc. We have historical trade linkages as well. But today, the biggest challenge for India is connectivity because we don't have direct land access to Central Asia. Land access has become a challenge as we don't share borders with Afghanistan. Right? We don't have direct borders either with Afghanistan or Central Asia. On paper, technically, we should have had a border here. Jammu and Kashmir should have shared a border here with Afghanistan near the Wakhan corridor. I'm saying that officially or technically we should have shared this border because India's official stand is that the whole state of J&K as it existed in 1947 belongs to the Indian Union. As per these official claims of the Indian government, we are supposed to share a small border with Afghanistan near the Bakan corridor. This would have given us access to Afghanistan and further into Central Asia. But in reality, on the ground, we don't have this access, we don't share this border with Afghanistan because Pakistan has illegally occupied these areas, which we refer to as POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. And there is no question of Pakistan giving us transit access. Considering our relations, usually Pakistan denies transit access to India. So that is why for India, connectivity has become a challenge, even though we have very, very close relations with the Central Asian countries. So we are exploring alternate routes via the Chabahar port, the strategic Chabahar port that India has built in Iran. And we had very grand ambition to connect this port with Afghanistan through a road rail network, to link this with the roads we have built in Afghanistan that connects Zaranj with Delaram. When a friendly Afghan government was present here between 2002 and 2022, India made very big investments in Afghanistan so that we could connect the Chabahar port that India had built with Afghanistan and further take this link into Central Asia. But as of now, there is a lot of uncertainty on these Indian investments because of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. So this is where India is facing a roadblock. So to address these challenges, recently India and Central Asian countries, they held a virtual summit at the start of this year. In January 2022, India had actually invited all the Central Asian leaders as the chief guests for our Republic Day parade. But unfortunately, they couldn't travel to India physically due to the pandemic, and instead a virtual summit was organized. During this virtual summit, many key steps have been taken. Both the sides have agreed to focus on connectivity projects, to explore ways in which Chabahar port and Afghanistan can be used to link India with Central Asia. They are looking to complete ongoing projects like the Tapi gas pipeline that brings natural gas from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then to India. They've also agreed to focus on counter-terrorism and collaborate at SCO to further their common objectives. So India definitely is a significant player in Central Asia, but China is way ahead of India as far as its influence is concerned. So we do face a strong competition. There is a strategic competition for influence between India and China that you get to witness in the Central Asia region. So these are some basic pointers that you should be aware of Central Asian geopolitics. So with this, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. We have covered 5 big topics that were in news last week. We have had an in-depth discussion on them, covering important facts that are needed for your prelims, along with the analysis needed for your mains. So I hope it was a fruitful session. Do let me know how it went by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.